And we are live, and we really cut that one really tight. You just came in. Good to see you. So this is the first time we're talking. How are you, Octavian?
Quite good actually. How about yourself?
I'm very well, very well. Why are you quite good?
Um, we're just completing the sale of our palace, and it feels quite good to get rid of it. So I'm quite
Yeah, I
happy.
wanted to ask. I wanted to ask you about that. So why was it good to get rid of it?
Well, it's sometimes people in your family buy an asset which has a reason for them, and
Hmm.
generations later it has no meaning to you anymore, and it's just like a millstone around your neck.
Mm,
Because money takes a lot of your time that and you rather do something else with the money and you rather do something else with your time.
mm.
So
So
that's the case
which
for me.
which palace was that?
um, Schloss Regensburg in Niederösterreich, so it's Schloss Regers if you google it.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay, it's that one. Okay, good. And so why did your ancestors buy that one? What was the purpose?
Well, so my ancestors, which was the Kefenmüller family, was one of Austria's princely houses, and my ancestor about 300 years ago bought the place to renovate it,
Hmm.
because he needed a representative palace for political gatherings, for parties, and that was the purpose of the building. So there was like no heating in it. It was a sole summer residence for parties, essentially.
Mm, interesting. And I looked at where it is. It's about like 2 hours away from Vienna, right? Is that correct? It's
An
on the
hour and a half,
hour
depends
and a
how
half,
fast you drive. Yeah.
and it's on the Czech border. I just wonder why it's a little bit like remote. Is that
Well,
right? I wonder why somebody would not be closer to a power center like Vienna or even Brno, if you can call that a power center.
well, if you look back at the Austrian Empire 300 years ago, it was like bang in the middle, rather than on the outskirts.
Hmm.
Also, the this area was the area where most of Austria's aristocracy had their summer palaces. So it's if you go into the wood quarter, it's called in Austria, there's
Hmm.
loads of palaces all over the place. So it was like this is where the Austrian noble high society went in summer, partly.
Interesting. Interesting. But then because I don't know terribly much about the Austrian nobility, but I know that there was like a strong tendency to go for the Sommerfrische somewhere in the, let's say like Semmering, which is more to the south, or to the areas of the lakes, which is
Yeah,
kind of in the Salzkammergut, that kind of area. So I was not familiar when I looked up a little bit your family history and the palace, the castles that you guys have.
well,
That was like, yeah, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, I just obviously Austria had several different places where you could go. It also always depended on where you had your land. So up there we had our forestry, our agricultural land.
Mhm,
So it made sense to have it around there.
mhm,
Also, yeah, as at different places, Austria was a very big empire. So you had noble families more based around Hungary, some more based around um, Czech Republic, Slovakia. So it always depended where was the epicenter of your, let's say, income.
absolutely, yeah. And when of course when you look back in a historic context, now I may think that okay, it's 1.5 hours in a car drive from a big power center like Vienna. But at the time, if you look at the entire Austria-Hungary monarchy, which at that time it was of course not, it was the Habsburg Empire, but it was not the K&K, right? It was not the Austro-Hungary thing, because the other the kingdom of Hungary was not included until in the 19th century, if I remember my history class correctly.
Probably. That one I'm not so sure about myself.
Yeah, yeah.
I
But
go
then
with you.
still, it was like Austria is tiny today, especially in comparison with back then. And so being this like 120 kilometers away from Vienna was still very close, right? So you could still reach that probably easily in a half day's journey at the time. And so it was not that far away from the power center. Yeah,
Exactly. Well,
yeah.
yeah.
Cool. So, of course, I'm very interested. And if you could maybe, as part of your introduction, tell us a little bit more about your family history, you on your website you write that it goes back 1,000 years. So that's just fascinating to me. My dad recently, just as a little bit of context, my dad started compiling our family history, and the earliest entry of anyone, which I think is even quite impressive for a non-aristocratic family, we have records back to 1650. So having 1,000-year record history is just incredibly impressive, and so it's fascinating. So if you could tell us a little bit about that and what your ancestors 1,000 years ago were doing.
Well, so the 1,000-year family history is from my grandmother's side. So that's always the princely house, the Kievenmüller princely house. Pilatis, we're also a noble family. We don't go back as long, so we go back to like the 14th century. Mm-hmm. But the Kievenmüller family, which our wealth stems from, so that's why I usually focus more on that one, goes back to the beginnings of Austria. So in the year 1000, the first records appear of our family coming to Austria. So back then, Austria was, before Osterreich was formed, it was still like a part of the Frankian Empire. And it was around that time. And we started in Corinthia. So we still have distant relatives, the Kievenmüllers down there. And only later in 1730, the family split up into several lineages. So we had one lineage which was more based in Lower Austria. This is my family, which was which then became the princely house. And then there was a lineage in Upper Austria and one in Corinthia. So, and by now there's only the Corinthian lineage left with the name Kievenmüller. Mm-hmm. So that's the very quick and short run through the family history coming to Austria.
Mm-hmm. And so, still, if we can stay with the 1,000 years ago,
yeah,
what can we imagine them doing? What were they? They were like landowners. They were they knights? Were they
knights?
The
first one who came over was a knight. Mm. That's where you usually began to become a noble family back then. And we did it the true Austrian way. So he married rich, and that's our family accumulated a lot of wealth by always marrying well over the 1,000 years. So that was one of the parts. And then you work your way up in nobility, and with a higher noble rank comes more responsibility, and with more responsibility there's more opportunity, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. And so there was also, I read on, I think in one of your posts, or not sure if it was on Wikipedia, I read many sources, is that in the 18th century there was like this split, as you said, but then also yes, there were like major acquisitions of the palaces and the castle and so on.
Exactly.
What was happening there? Was there a specific reason for this, or was it just happenstance?
It was just happenstance. So the acquisitions happened because my ancestor back then, the one before the split happened, was looking for a place close to Vienna to build his representative palace, which became Regensburg. And Regensburg was just part of a big estate that was being sold at the time. If I'm not mistaken, I think the previous owners ended up in insolvency. So that's how it came about. And the split came in his inheritance because he split it up between his sons, which at the time was a bit unusual, because usually you would have your oldest son get most of it, the second son has to go to the military, the third son enters the clergy, and so on. So that would have been the standard procedure back then.
Okay, and so where would you fall in that? Are you do you have a half brother? I know, but do you
have I have an older half brother, so I would have had I would have had to go to the military.
Okay,
basically.
Good. When did this tradition, was it slowly abandoned? This tradition of the 1, 2, 3?
Well, it is, that was like a noble standard procedure back then. So not every family kept to it. It was just the standard that was being done. And I'm actually not sure when it was changed in general. So in our family, I think everybody was in the military up to my father. So my father is the first one who was not in the military.
Okay, so they're quite recent that it was.
Yeah, especially the Pilati family was. We were situated in Silesia, So we were quite a strong military family. And before coming to Silesia, we were usually bookkeepers. So we looked after the money for the clergy. Then later we looked after the money for the Austrian Empire, and that's how that family worked its way up the ladder.
Okay. And so you now sold the palace. How
Yes.
do you sell how do you sell a palace, and who do you sell it to? If you can, I don't know how much of this you want to share with.
No, it's stayed. The buyers made a press release, so it's nothing secret. So it's
Okay.
Clemens Heilmann is one of the buyers. He's an Austrian real estate investor, and the second buyer they buy it together is Gottfried Hellenwein. He's an artist.
Oh, interesting.
So they both were interested by themselves, and then they decided to buy it together rather than one of their own. They know each other privately, so that's how it came about.
And how was that selling like this big piece of century-old family history? Was there any wistfulness, any nostalgia connected with it?
Yes, of course, a little bit. For myself, it's 80% happy to sell it and to be rid of it, and 20% with a sad eye looking at it. So my dad is also quite happy about it. My mother not so much. She spent the last 40 years looking after the place, so she has a very strong emotional connection to it. And you mentioned family history. I have a strong belief that that the family legacy, the family history is not bound to like a building or an estate or even a company. It's more the family's identity. It's the story that you leave behind, and that stays with the family, not with any worldly goods, as you would say.
Okay. So what does a family mean to you? I know it's a broad question, but since you mentioned this, that it's not tied to any assets, but so what does it mean for you?
You mean family in general?
No, your family.
My family.
Maybe
Well,
family in general, but it's like,
yeah.
I'm curious about the spiritual connection here.
It's so to explain this a little bit better. For years I was rather not so happy to be born in this family, and I saw it more as bad luck in a sense. It's when you're young and you grow up and you go to school and you're a bit the odd one out because of your heritage. That makes it a little difficult. And only like a few years ago, with reflecting upon it and just realizing that you have a vast amount of history that's written down, which gives you a huge amount of opportunity to learn from your ancestors. So if I look back in history, we've had people doing all kinds of things. And if you're interested in doing something similar, I'm pretty sure if I go back, I'll find someone who might have done something similar, and I can look at it and say, okay, that's how I should do it, or maybe that's how I really shouldn't do it, depending on how it went, of course. So that's the main, how I say that for me, that's the treasure behind having a long family history, that there's a lot of learning opportunity.
Is there a lot of, do you have like a library of your ancestors' biographies? Do you have some kind of like an encyclopedia of your ancestors and all of that? How is that being kept?
We have quite a bit of stuff about our family in Vienna in the National Library. My great grandfather gave away our our own library to the National Library there. That is all the personal stuff, so history and things like that. The library about incomes, like all the economic things that the family did, we lost those in the Second World War. They got burned when our palace got taken over by the Russians. So it's a bit, we don't have the whole picture, but the personal history is there. And being one of Austria's princely houses, there's quite a lot of stuff being written about us by people doing their masters or doctors in history. So there is quite a lot of research on the family itself that you can read into if you want. That's the plus side.
Absolutely. So then, of course, I haven't considered that actually strangers would dig into your family history because this is history, right? This is how you conduct it. You just look at what a couple of prominent families did, or generally prominent people, and you guys benefit from that.
Exactly. There's quite a lot of people out there who know much more about my family than I do.
Yeah,
exactly. It helps.
That's great. That's a little bit creepy, no? That some people know so much about your family history. Yeah. So you mentioned one of Austria's princely houses. How many are there?
Actually, I don't know. I would have to look that up myself.
Okay,
that's something.
But we're not talking. I mean, Austria is not so big. Are we talking? Do you think I was like dozens or hundreds, or what do you think?
No. That's more in the dozens rather than the hundreds.
More in the dozens. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Not that many.
Okay. So that's so fascinating that you said. I want to get back to this topic of you not being happy about not being born into the family. Can you talk a little bit about that? How was it growing up as part of nobility with a 29, as you say, 29 character long surname? By the way, what's this? Can you say this? Well, what's the 29 character long surname?
Well, it's Octavian Sigismund Maria Gotthard, Graf Pilati von Tassel zu Daxberg.
Wow, is that all of that in your passport?
Yes, that's all in my passport. I have 4 more first names, but they're only on my birth certificate. I don't know. My parents thought it's quite funny. I'm called Octavian, which is 8, and then I have 8 first names. It's a bit of a joke, but you can't fit them all in the passport.
Go for it. But can you now just give us the premiere, or at least LinkedIn premiere, of your entire name, including your 8 full first names and your last name?
Well, the 8 first names are sometimes tricky, but I will try. So it's Octavian Sigismund Maria Gotthard, Hector, Albrecht. I have to think for a second. Hector, Albrecht. I'm missing 2. This always happens when people ask me. And that's Graf Pilati von Tassel zu Daxberg. I'll have to think a bit, and then they will come to mind. If you never use them, you don't know them. That's the thing.
That's so fascinating that you don't. It's the first time that I meet somebody who doesn't know their full name, but it's crazy that this, that the name is so long that you wouldn't even be able to fit in its entirety into a passport. Fascinating.
I have problems all the time with like banks with any that it's like, oh, we can't fit your whole name in because we don't have enough space in our system. I'm like, well, but please make the space. And because all the KYC doesn't work if it's not exactly the same as in the passport. And it's really bothersome. Yeah. It made me consider changing my name to shorten it somehow. It's annoying.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, so tell me, how was it growing up? What was like kids' life like? How did you go to school? What kind of school did you attend? Public school or?
Yeah, I went to normal public school in Austria for the first 13 years of my life, and then I went to boarding school in the UK and did my A-levels there. So growing up, so I went to our local Volksschule, like primary school in up in Regensburg, so like 2 villages away was the school. I spent half the time with my parents, the other half the time with my nanny. So I most of the time from Monday to Friday, I was at the place of my nanny's place with her kids, spending my time there. And on the weekends, I was with my parents. So that was for the first 9 years of my life. And then I went to boarding school here in Austria, the Altenburger Sängerknaben. And then I left to the UK. And I came back to study here in Austria.
How was that, not seeing your parents during the week?
It was a bit strange. I don't know many people who had. I mean, it's very similar to what is done with a lot of kids nowadays, where you're like in all day kindergarten and things. But it was a bit strange. But for me, it was my normal reality. So you don't realize, you think it's normal till there comes the day along when you find out that it's not normal when you're a bit older. So that's when kind of like hits you and like, why is it like this? Looking back at it, it was probably the best my parents could have done for my upbringing. So I'm quite grateful nowadays for how they did it. And
Really?
yes.
Why? Why do you think so?
Because my nanny, she was, she had 4 kids, and she did a very good job at being kind of a mother figure. And my parents, growing up after the war, and they didn't really know what they were doing as parents so much. So that's probably also one of the reasons why they chose this way. With all the estates and the problems coming with it, they had a very hard time to prioritize, to think, okay, do I look after what's more, it's our kid, or do I take care of this problem and that? So that's how they solved it for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how was it in school? So it was normal public school. You were probably one of the few, if not the only child coming from nobility, where you...
I was the only one.
Only one. And was that... So you suggested already that it wasn't that it was cool, but it was more like, did people make fun of you, or how was that?
Yeah, of course. So in primary school, it was all right. That was very local. People didn't care so much about. Then the next 3 years, when I went to secondary school in Austria, that was a bit not so great. So yeah, people making fun of me, being singled out a little bit because being the count and things like that. So that was rather was a rather difficult time for me back then.
Mm-hmm. Mm. And then did that change with the boarding school in the UK? I guess there were several other people, maybe from prominent families, I could imagine.
Yeah, that changed a lot for me going to the UK. I mean, the bullying and so on is much worse in UK boarding schools than it is in Austrian schools. But the difference was that it was like everybody gets bullied there, like everyone. Just you have like a hierarchy. So if you're like a first year, you have to clean the shoes of the older ones and all these things. So everybody is kind of treated roughly the same, or at least that's what it seemed like to me back then. And so that was much easier to handle than being the one that's picked on, if that makes any sense.
So it's equal opportunity bullying, equal opportunity.
Yeah.
Oh God, that's terrible. Fascinating. Yeah, but I heard about, I read the autobiography of Christopher Hitchens, and he suggested he was also in a boarding school, and there the kind of systematized bullying came out from that book. So I guess you were part of that. Where were you? In which school?
I was in Ampleforth College.
Where's that, roughly? What's the...
That's in North Yorkshire. So that's it's a few hours north of London.
Okay. But generally, you say, was the school experience, the bullying aside, was that better?
Yes, for me that was a very good time. So you sometimes speak to your classmates when you meet them up again, and there's a few guys who are like didn't enjoy the time so much, but for me personally, it was a very enjoyable time. I would do it again.
Why did you enjoy it so much? What do you think?
Well, it gave me an opportunity to leave my family system a little bit, and make my own experiences. And the education there is, I think, in a private school is better than in a public school, because people you pay a lot of money for your kid to be educated well. So teachers take it seriously, the school takes it seriously, and in public schools it's like the lottery. You get a good teacher, it's great. If you get a crap one, you're screwed. So it's
So also, would you say that because it was a private school in the UK, or as they call it, public school, interestingly enough, right? That it was also better than the relatively good public schools that we have in Austria. Would you say that it was better in the UK? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I had a very interesting experience also, because I did my postgraduate in London at London Business School. And of course, I attended public schools in Austria as I was growing up. And the one thing that struck me, I wonder if you had the same experience, was that in the UK, they place so much more attention and emphasis on actually doing. Like for example, you have a project and then you need to present an outcome. Granted, in my case, it was a business school. So there, of course, the focus is on business, but we did constantly have to do like internships, projects with actual companies, or you even do, let's say you research an entrepreneurial idea, you go out there and you talk to people. You, like, for example, we did like a study on how people solve like urban transport, meaning how do they have their things with them? You know, what kind of carry on? I don't know. We didn't really have a clue what we were doing, so we picked that topic. But you actually go out there and talk to strangers. That was part of the curriculum. And as I was doing it, I was enjoying it so much because the contrast to Austrian schooling was so great. Austrian schooling is, at least in my experience, very theoretical, very conceptual. It's like the whole thing is you prepare so that then at some point you can do. And the UK system is that you simply do and you learn as you go. It's like an iterative cycle. You're nodding, so I see. I see
yes,
that.
I nod a lot because that's I can underwrite that. That's the main difference. Having been to the UK schooling system and then coming back here to go to university and knowing how, talking to my school friends, how studying in the UK is compared to Austria, it's sometimes I look back and I'm like, I should have gone to university in the UK rather than here. Would have been better.
Yeah, I wonder why didn't you?
I looked at, so I chose mechanical engineering, and I very, very strongly looked at the rankings, the world rankings for mechanical engineering. And at my time, there was only one university better than Munich University. And I didn't get into Imperial College. I was very lazy and didn't get my grades. So, and in Munich back then, the university there starts in August already, and my grades came in September, so I couldn't inscribe at university. So I was stuck there, and I was like, okay, what I'm gonna do now? I have a year to kill, and then I inscribed at university in Vienna. So I thought, okay, I've never been in Vienna, so I spent a year here, do a few exams, and take them with me to Munich, and then I ended up staying. Picken geblieben, wie man so schön sagt in Österreich.
Picken geblieben, yeah. At the TU, Technische Universität?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean that's a very good university.
It scores quite highly on the difficulty ranking. But in the teaching quality rankings, it's moved down a lot in the last few years.
Interesting. Okay, good. And so, why did you choose mechanical engineering?
That's an interesting story. We did so in the UK. They did all kinds of tests with us to see which were our strengths and weaknesses, and which areas are we interested in, which areas are we good in, and which studies overlap with this the best. So we got like a test result, and for me it was in industrial design on the top, then it was architecture, then it was civil engineering, and then it was mechanical engineering on fourth spot. And one of my uncles, he was an architect and an industrial designer. So I talked to him, and I actually wanted to do industrial design, and he told me that studying industrial design is a waste of time. It's better for me to study something technical like mechanical engineering, so I know my stuff, because drawing, he can teach me drawing. I don't need to go to university to learn that. So that's the reasoning. That was the reason behind choosing mechanical engineering. I didn't have it on my radar at all till this test thingy came out.
Okay, very interesting. Okay, and then you attend that. What were your job ambitions at the time? What were you thinking you would be doing? Working for what kind of company, or even starting your own business, or did you have a plan?
Didn't really have a plan, to be honest. No.
And that's
I wanted to
go ahead.
I just wanted to design stuff, solve problems for customers, make products. That's what I had in mind, but no plan, no company in mind.
Okay. And so then what happened? Did you start having a job because you took over, or you started taking care of your family crisis, which is, of course, we're going to be talking about that at length, when you were 25? So
yes.
At what age did you graduate university?
I haven't graduated yet, to be honest. I have 4 more exams, and then I would have my master's and bachelor's. But so being mechanical engineering, there's like 2 killer exams that you have in the bachelor's. I'm missing those. There was like a year in my university time, maybe it was 2012, where I only tried to pass these 2 exams because that's all that was left in my bachelor's. For a whole year, I only failed at these exams, and I was so depressed that I was like, okay, I need to do something else. I need to, have some successes again. Otherwise, this is not going anywhere. So in Austria, which is very strange, you can start your master's without having your bachelor's. You just can't officially graduate till you have your bachelor's, but you can do all the exams. So I've got nearly my master's finished. I even have my master's thesis written. And then again, it was time again to pass these 2 exams, and it was a bit frustrating trying to study again. So I got a job at Rheinmetall.
What were you doing there?
I was in systems engineering. So I was a project engineer part-time. And as a project engineer, you have the overview. You're in between your engineers and the customer, trying to make what the customer wants happen inside the company, and trying to communicate to the customer if his wishes are not possible. It's a very interesting place to be in, because no one in the company potentially likes you because you keep coming with things that they should be doing that's not working and things like that. So it's a bit tricky. And you don't do much engineering actually in that position. You do a lot of PowerPoint and Excel list engineering and talking to a lot of people.
How long were you doing this?
I did that for 9 months. I got my job like 4 or 5 months before I took over the crisis management for the family, and then I stayed on the job for another half year, and then it got too much, so I had to quit something, either the family business or the job. But it was just getting too much. After 6 months of doing an 80-hour week, you're pretty done.
Yeah, I heard that on one of your other podcasts where you mentioned that, or I think it was where you discussed the crisis, the anatomy of a crisis, where you said the 6 months that you were going completely, as in Austria would say, am Zahnfleisch, that you just completely exhausted yourself. Is that those 6 months that you're referring to?
Yes, that's those 6 months. So I had my job for 20 hours a week. I managed the crisis, and I wrote my master's thesis in the time. So
that's quite a handful.
Yeah, that was quite a handful. I mean, you're looking back at it later, you're really surprised when there's enough pressure of what you can actually do, but it's not sustainable to keep it up.
Absolutely. Okay, so talk to me about the family business. Was always a bit of an option for you, wasn't it? You could have entered the family business at any time if you had wanted. Is that right? Is that how it works?
Kind of. I mean, our family business was very straightforward. We had forests, and we grow trees, and we cut them and sell them. So that was and yes, I could have entered, but it was with my older half brother and me in the picture, and it was a very weird situation, because there was no decision on who would take over the family business, how is it going to work. So the first time I was actually really confronted with the family business when I was 18, and my father was like, "You're now grown up, I'll give over the family business to you and your brother." And I was like, no, I don't want this, it's too early. So we agreed, we pushed it along till I'm finished with my studies. Obviously, unconsciously, you're not very motivated to finish your studies when you're supposed to take over family business and you don't feel prepared for it. So when I was 23, my dad again started discussions in the family about handing it over, because he wanted to really hand over. He didn't want to continue being in charge of it, and we couldn't find an agreement on how to split it up or how to hand it over. Each of us 3 wanted something different. So can
you talk about what that was? What did people want differently, and what did you want?
Well, first of all, my father wanted us to take it on together. Like basically, he looked back at the last few generations where the family business always got split up between siblings, and so everybody has their own company, but they get smaller.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, we're not going to do it this time. You will take it on 50-50 together. One of you will be CEO and one of you will be sitting on the advisory board. And he wanted my older brother to be CEO and I should have gone on the advisory board. And so we didn't want that. We wanted, it's growing. So my half brother and I, we saw each other like 2 or 3 times a year. So it's not, you don't know each other as well as when you're brothers. I'm assuming. I don't have a brother I grew up with or a sister, and we had different. So my half brother is 15 years older, so he was at a different time in his life, having his own family, his own kids, his own company already, and I was still in an age where you want to go out and do your own stuff. So it and there was different mindsets. So I was always of the mindset saying, okay, this is a forestry company. You can manage this without having to be present all the time. You just need the right employees, and if you come a few times a year to check on stuff, it will work. My father was of a different opinion. He says you need to be there and look at everything yourself. And so these are like the kind of things that were coming up. Also, our 2 historical buildings, the palace and the castle, there was very different opinions on what is each building worth, what should be done with each building. So back then, I didn't want to sell the palace, for example. My brother and my father were very pro selling. Now I end up selling it after taking care of it for 5 years. I understood, okay, we should really sell this. So it's opinions and experiences change as well over time.
Okay.
So I hope
Good.
that answers the question.
Yeah, totally. So let's get back to, so you're in a job, you're doing the work, and then your father comes to you with, how did you hear about the crisis?
Well, the crisis actually, so the crisis was kind of the reason for me to get a job. So yes, I kind of forgot to say that. So in November 2014, I went along to the annual general meeting of the, so let me backtrack a little bit. So why did we have a crisis? So I will quickly explain what happened. Otherwise people get confused. So it's the company. So my father was on the advisory board for an Austrian stock company called THI, Tea Courts International.
Mm-hmm.
And they did teak plantations, which is a type of tree in Costa Rica. And when they did the IPO, he was asked to sit on the advisory board, which he did for a couple of years. And things were, the IPO didn't go as well. They didn't raise the money they needed, so they ran out of. But they did it anyway, and they ran out of money, and looked for financing. And in Costa Rica, back at the time, you paid like 8% interest rate, and in Austria it was 1.5%. So they were trying to find a way to reduce the interest rates by financing the projects in Costa Rica and Austria, and that's where we came in. So our land was taken as security for a loan in Austria, and it was backed with securities in Costa Rica to us. So they could get the loan much cheaper, and we were supposed to receive like Haftungsprovision, like what do you call it in English? Yeah, like we were supposed to get a few percent.
A fee for taking on the risk.
Yeah, yes, exactly, a risk fee. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And so that was the structure, and that's how it happened. And so in 2014, in November, a new CEO came along. He looked at everything there, and we had the annual general meeting. And my father said, asked me to come along, because a few things were, I always accompanied him to meetings when they were in English, because he doesn't speak English. So I was translating for him in negotiations and things like that in English language. And at the annual general meeting, basically the CEO stepped to the stage and announced that in his findings, the company is a fraud. So the fraud was basically that the company was overvaluated by about a factor of 7. And with that annual general meeting, the whole crisis started to really evolve. There was already, when the CEO was doing his, let's say, looking at things and doing his investigation on the company, there was already signs that we are going to be in a crisis and this is not looking so good. But my father especially, also, I had no clue what was going on, but my father especially, he didn't really want to see that it was a fraud, because in the advisory board, that's one thing you learn, that sitting on the advisory board doesn't mean that you actually know the company, because you depend on the information that you get given by the CEOs, and if that information is cooked, you don't know what's really going on. So that's basically what happened, and in that, so after that annual general meeting, I was like, okay, this looks like we might lose everything, so I need a job, otherwise I have no money. So that's what moved me to start looking for jobs and apply.
That's crazy. That must have been like you going out of that meeting thinking that your entire, I mean, at least on the material side, 1,000-year history is coming to an end because of a wrong investment. That must have like hit you like a bag of bricks, no?
Yeah, it did. But I was just like, okay, what is this? So that was for us. My father did this investment with we had a plan in mind, and in forestry if you're doing it really well in Austria, you have a yield of 1.5% on your assets value. And with this, he thought, okay, with using our land as securities, with the risk fee we get, we increase our yield to 3%. So I double our yield with this. So that was the idea behind it. Mm-hmm. And he visited the plantations. They drove circles with him. So they had several plantations in Costa Rica. One very, very good one, and the other ones were crap. And if it's like jungle setting, and they drive you around for hours on the same plantation, and you think you've seen everything, that's the kind of stuff.
Interesting. So they deliberately, and it was fraud. It was not just kind of negligence. It was deliberately that they.
Well, I can't really say it's fraud because nobody, has been convicted of fraud. With Costa Rica and Austria, there's no extraditionary treaties or anything. So the Austrian, district attorney who looked at it said, okay, well, the fraud has happened in Costa Rica, so it's none of our business. And nobody did the work in Costa Rica because crime cases take a long time down there, so nobody bothered to actually open a crime case in Costa Rica. Mm-hmm. And the Costa Rican authorities were like, okay, it's Austrians embezzling Austrians in Costa Rica, we don't give a shit.
So the fraud was being committed in Austria or in Costa Rica?
Well, that's the big discussion. So the money was collected in Austria, but the overvaluation happened in Costa Rica, basically.
Okay. Okay, good. So you're getting a job, and at that point, didn't it occur to you that you need to, at that point, step in?
No. That was a bit of a surprise. So how did it happen that I ended up stepping in June? I think it was June 2015. So about 7 months after my father, my half brother, and his wife. There was like the three of them managing the crisis. My half brother and my father went on holiday for a while, and they said that they needed a break. I think it was about 2 weeks, and so my dad sent out an email to the other investors and the CEO of this company that he is going away for a holiday for 2 weeks and he's not available. And my half brother with him, and he put my contact details in the email and said, if there's any questions, call my younger son. So, and I remember I was sitting in Munich in a beer garden when this email was sent out. with my colleagues, because we had like a monthly meeting at the headquarters in Munich. Otherwise, I was in we were stationed in Austria, and the first person to call us was our lawyer, and asking me, did you read the email? And I was like, what email are you talking about? Why are you calling me? Do I need to translate something again for my father? Or what's up? So that was the page I was on. So yeah, so that's how I stepped in for 2 weeks. And after those 2 weeks, our lawyer back then, so when my father came back, our lawyer wanted a meeting with the two of us, and he suggested to my father for me to take over the crisis management.
Oh, so you did quite well in those 2 weeks.
It seems like it. Well, I did 2 weeks of not saying yes to anything. I just said, I don't know, I'll think about it, or I'll ask my father when he comes back. So I kind of, and the reason he mentioned why he suggested it was that this crisis takes a lot of energy. My father was 70 back then, and it most of the meetings and everything is in Vienna. He's living an hour and a half away. It's always difficult, and that it needs a fresh perspective and things like that. So, and my dad on the spot decided to. So he asked me on the spot, "It's like, are you ready for this?" And I was like, "Okay, yes." So that's how it happened. Which again, thinking back, shouldn't have been done like that. We should have talked in the family about it before making a decision. And my brother was rightly so very, very pissed because nobody spoke to him about this, and he thought it was not a very good idea to have a 25-year-old on the steering wheel. Although I wasn't, this is a kind of situation you think you're on the steering wheel, but you really aren't, because the father still has to make the end decisions. So
yeah, I definitely wanted to talk about that. But why do you think was the choice made that you should run this rather than your half brother?
My half brother didn't want to run it.
Okay.
He always said that, look, he has his kids, he has his own company, he can't put all that at risk to try and save the company. And he also said that it's not our responsibility to sort this out. It's our father's responsibility to sort this out. So that was his standpoint.
Okay. Was not your standpoint. So you wanted to help. You stepped in because you wanted to help.
Yeah.
Okay. And so at the time you were still having the job, and
yes.
Your father asks you, "Can you do this?" And you were like, "Okay, yes." Did you feel that you were ready to take over, or were you completely overwhelmed initially?
It's interesting. Well, you don't. So I'm not sure if you ever heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Yeah. I was on the top of Mount Stupid when I said yes. Very confident, and you work, and it's fun because honestly, the job I had at Rheinmetall, I didn't enjoy it that much because I wasn't really a systems engineer with any responsibility. I was just an assistant to a system engineer. So I spent a lot of time not having any work to do, being bored, and this was kind of fun. But I had no clue what the hell I was doing, really. So I was lucky. I had a friend who specializes on asset recovery in frauds. I didn't know about that. He phoned me one day and said, "Look, I can help you." And I remember after this being like the 20th phone call of friends saying, "I will help you," and I was like, "No, it's okay. Really, you can't help me." So that was like the one call that helped a lot. And
wait,
so
quickly.
That's
interesting. So you said many people called you trying to help, and you at some point learned to say no.
Yes.
Why? Did you feel that they wanted to take advantage of you in any way, or?
No, the problem was rather that it took a lot of my time. So I would meet my friends, they would tell me what they could help with, or they would try to help, and it was futile most of the time. So it's like, if again, other people on the top of Mount Stupid, my friends were the same age. So it's like, oh, here, let me look at the, what do you call it? The, 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 at the books of the company. I'll see if I find anything, things like that. And you sit there for hours, and it's like, no. So you've and you start to feel a little isolated with all this kind of when you're managing a crisis. The most helpful thing was to get a mentor. That was the biggest improvement.
Who was that?
So that was another Austrian noble aristocracy who works for one of who works for one of Austria's bigger banks in crisis management.
Okay.
So he was suggested to me by my friend. Said phone him, ask him to help. And so I had meetings with him regularly. He would tell me, look at this, talk to this person, talk to him, introduction. So that was like a big game changer.
And that was, so talk me through the timeline of you taking over. That's, you still have the job.
Yeah.
And then how many months later did you go exclusively to work on the family business?
That was in January 2016.
Okay. So you went January 2016, and that was how many months into your job? 8, you said. Okay.
9
months.
Yeah.
Okay. So after 9 months and then doing it in parallel, then in January 2016, you're managing the family business. Well, not the family business, you're managing the crisis.
Yes, exactly.
Important distinction. And the crisis took about 3 years to resolve?
Roughly, yes. I mean, it depends on how you look at it. I personally say that the crisis continued longer than that for us, because then you have your main cash-producing asset sold. You have a lot of cash sitting in your bank account. That's not really helpful. While you have another asset like the palace, which is eating cash at the same time. But you have no cash flow, no positive. So you have a negative cash flow. And that was quite stressful. But before that, yes, it took about 3 years to resolve that crisis with the banks sitting behind us, poking us, going sell. And I was very stubborn at the beginning. I said, no, I'm not doing anything. I'm not selling. You have to. So I was very, very stubborn, naive a little bit. I said to the banks, look, well, you fucked up your due diligence. You owe us money. It's an interesting conversation to have with them. So I had beginner's luck in the end. So in the 2 years, the first 2 years, I was very stubborn. I said, no, we're not selling anything. I will save the family business. This is going to work out fine. Till a lot of like restructuring plans didn't work out. I talked to several banks to refinance, didn't work out either because of the negative press this was bringing. Most banks were saying, no, we don't want anything to do with this. And in that time, forest land prices went up quite a lot because of the interest rate policy of the European Central Bank. So we hit like negative rates in the time, I think. And forest land was a very unsexy investment for years because a 1.5% yield was not really interesting. But it's a very safe investment. And if you can make a bigger yield on forest land than you can do on bonds, people start to want to invest in forest land. So that was basically the dynamic that helped us a lot by the land prices to what we were told we would get for our forest to what we did get when we sold went up by like 60 to 70%. So that was the main accelerator for us. So when there was a point when we said, okay, restructuring isn't working, we would have to spend a lot of money on court cases. Back then, I didn't know that there was litigation funds. Now I know that. So if you have like a big law case with a big bank or something that you can't finance, go to a litigation fund. If your case is good, they will finance it for you and take a cut at the end. So it's I think I got myself lost a little bit.
No, but I just wanted to get into this. So would you say that the massive 60% appreciation of the forestry land that you guys own, that this was the biggest factor in you getting out of the crisis?
Yes.
Sounds like
that
it,
was
right?
the biggest. Yes, that was the biggest factor.
Okay. quickly to that thing that you told the bank that they messed up because they didn't do their due diligence. Well, but so did you a little bit, no? So on your end, that you did not
Yes.
properly vet. So it was like both parties were at fault, but you were effectively telling them, look, you are as much at fault on this as we are.
Yeah.
That was your argument. Okay, so
yes, that was my argument.
Therefore, were you suggesting that you should somehow like split the losses, or
yes,
what was your?
I told them how about we take a haircut? You cut, we can't pay you back everything, but if you cut off 30-40% of what we owe you, we can pay it back in time.
And they didn't want that.
They didn't want that, no.
Okay, and then
because we had enough land to service all of it, that was the problem. You only get a haircut if there's actually not enough. So the only thing that's also something was a crappy situation. So usually you can get a bank to do a haircut with you if you say, look, give me a haircut, I can pay it back in this time of this years because I can't pay you everything right now, or I will go in insolvency, and in insolvency they usually get far less than if you find an agreement with a haircut and a repayment plan. But in our case,
because you have to do some kind of a fire sale then, and the prices you get are much lower.
Yeah, or you just have there's laws in place. You can force them to receive less, or you have the most expensive thing in an insolvency is usually the what do you call it? Masseverwalter. It's like a terminology. I don't know. Usually a lawyer is appointed by the state to look after. Yeah, like an asset management is appointed by the state to work through the insolvency. And as long as your asset, which would be our forest, is making money to pay the asset manager, he has no stress to find a solution. And he is in full charge and you can't do anything. So that's usually a pretty shitty situation to be in if you owed money. So if you want to get your money back, an insolvency is only the last resort that you agree to usually. And in our case, in an insolvency, they weren't scared about it because we had enough assets to pay everything back.
And they did not have in the contracts with you that there was no way for them to force you to sell. Obviously, it was a matter of negotiation, so they could not force you to sell. Is that right?
No, they can't force you to sell. If they force you, it's in foreclosure, and then it's auctioned.
Okay, but normally
if you don't fight back, but if you fight back, you can drag it out for years in court.
Okay, and that is what you were doing.
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm thinking just as a parallel, if I were to stop my mortgage payments, the bank could force me to sell. They would effectively take hold. It's not like even force me to sell. It's like they own the land. They own the house.
So but we weren't the creditor. No, wait, is creditor the wrong word? We were not owning them money. It was the company that took out the loan owing them money, and we were just the security holder. And there's different laws in that, and so it was a tricky, not very easy situation because the hats you have on are slightly different.
Yeah, absolutely. And in this case, good for you, because if you had been the debtor in this case,
the debtor, thank you, that's the word.
Right, the debtor, then the bank would have had a handle on it, and they simply could have said, dude, it's in the contract, sell now. And you would have been forced, and there goes a 1,000-year family history, at least on the material side. Got it. Okay, so good. So you were in a good situation, and then you were helped by the fact that the forest appreciated, which then solved the problem over time. So can you share? Did you do a haircut with the bank at all, or did you repay them in full?
We repaid in full. I think one bank offered us this like a very small reduction that we took, like 3% or something. So we did get a little haircut, but that was mainly the interest rates that accumulated over the time.
Okay.
So they basically offered, okay, you don't have to pay any of the interest rates from the last 2 years and just pay back what's owed.
Okay, good. And so now you said that after 3 years of this, of back and forth in the courts, that it was more or less solved, that you were able to solve this issue, and then you still had the negative or flat balance of a cash flow because you're losing money from the palaces. And this is now that you've sold Regensburg, is that now completely solved? So is the company now again cash flow positive?
Yeah, well, the company looks very different. So we're not a forestry company any longer. The company as such doesn't exist any longer because we sold it. It's more like we own investments. It's a bit like a family office owning investments here and there, and
okay. So in the end, you sold the forestry land then?
Yes, we sold it.
Oh, okay. Was that also triggered by the crisis? You said it.
Yes. That was basically triggered by the crisis.
Okay. Good. Now let's talk about the personal aspect. Now I'm really curious because you obviously took over this very, very young. You were 25. Give me your maybe we can do it on the Dunning-Kruger spectrum, but also more generally, how are you coping with this emotionally? I mean, I think as I was listening to other interviews with you, I was thinking like, how would I feel in this situation? And I feel that given the magnitude of this, the initial setting is like paralysis. At least I think that what I might be in, at least for the first few hours. Was that same with you? How did you cope?
I have to think back a little bit. I mean, there's so many moments that you just want to forget when you go through something like that. But I was a bit paralyzed at the beginning, as you would say, with like, I'm in charge of this now. And then when the paralysis wears off, you just start doing. Especially when you have like a goal in front of your eyes and you're like, okay, the first thing I did, I sat down with like the files and I just read into everything because I didn't really know enough. So I looked at where is the land, what are the figures, what are the numbers, and again, I didn't study economics. So things like insolvency law, I had to read into all of this, get my head around it. I had no clue. As I said, I had no clue at the beginning what I was doing. I did a lot of research on people involved here, etc. And it became very interesting once you. So I read through the evaluations of the company, and it was very interesting to see how people who knew their stuff didn't see the obvious fraud tricks in the evaluation because nobody really read it. It was done by a renowned evaluator in Austria, who was a friend of my father's, who also he did the evaluation, and then a year later, I think he died. And he based his evaluation again on evaluations done in Costa Rica. So he did copy paste mainly. And so there was things like, they in the evaluation, all of the land they owed in Costa Rica was plantations. But in reality, there's laws in Costa Rica that only about half of the land is allowed to be a plantation. The rest has to stay in natural forest. So that was like the first thing where you already have your factor 2 coming into place. And then there was things like the prices were inflated that they were calculating that they would be getting. If you know forestry, the way that you do a plantation, if you plant 10,000 trees, you will not be harvesting 10,000 trees at the end of the day, but like a few hundred, because you take them out as time goes along, as they grow. But they would be calculating with the amount of trees they plant, and they would say, oh, by harvesting time, we would have this many trees at this size. And so that was, if you know your stuff about forestry, it was pretty obvious where the problems were. And it was shocking when you're 25 and you find these things, and there's all these experts out there who looked at this and didn't see it, and it does make you think a bit.
It's crazy now, because then you realize that even the supposed experts very often don't have a clue what they're talking about, or they may, but they're just lazy to do the work.
Yes.
And then that really impresses upon you, well, how does the world actually work? There must be so much of this.
Yeah, that is like, it hits you and you're like, what the fuck did people do here, basically? Sorry, my language, but excuse my language, but it's just it hits you quite hard, and you have to be careful. So that happened quite a bit, that you put yourself in the victim role too much, and you're like, oh, it's also unfair, because it's not helping. It doesn't help you. It's ruminating. It doesn't help you to find a solution to the problem.
Okay.
So what kept me driving was I took over and I vowed. I said we'll get out of this without having to sell anything. That was my goal. Obviously, I didn't reach it, but that's what kept me going for a long time, till the point where I realized, okay, I don't know how to do this. It's not doable. And then I gave in and said, okay, we'll sell.
What drove you at the time? Was there, and at least in my mind, that would probably drive me in this scenario, is a sense of responsibility towards my, at least, family heritage? Was that an aspect that drove you?
Yes, that was definitely one of the aspects that drove me. Also, you grow up with the business. You see it. In our case, I knew the forest like my pocket. If you would drop me somewhere, I would find home, no problem. So you kind of like identify with the business in a sense, and if it's gone, it leaves like a vacuum, which it also did for us as a family when we did sell. But it this and the fear of change, maybe a little bit also, that keeps you going. You don't want this change, and again, it gave me a kind of purpose. I felt, not getting very far in university. No, that's the wrong word, but having a problem with those two big exams in university, not being very happy with my job because it didn't turn out to be what I expected it to be when I applied. I mean, they paid very well, but still, it wasn't really fulfilling. And then it kind of like gives you a purpose to do what with a goal, and that just alone, this goal and purpose can keep you going quite far.
Absolutely. Okay. So what would you say, how have you matured in this process? And what do you think have you learned that, like, in hindsight, what would you have done differently in these 3 years of managing the crisis?
Wow, that's well, there's a lot of things I would have done differently in hindsight. There's a lot of things I learned. So the biggest thing, like the top 3 things I would say that I learned that are the most important, is look after yourself. So I neglected myself very strongly. It ended in very severe health consequences for me, which I'm still trying to recover from today. Not sleeping enough, working too much, there's no point doing that. After a certain amount of hours of work you do on a day, the quality of work you do decreases dramatically, and it makes no sense to do anything of importance after a certain amount of time. Also, that you only have a certain amount of willpower to your disposal every day, and once that's depleted, you will not be able to make any good decisions. So don't make them if your willpower isn't there. You can always make, so nothing is so urgent usually that you need to make the decision on the spot, unless somebody's shooting at you or something like that. That's and even then you sometimes have a few seconds time to think it through, so you can always do it the next day. And there's a vast, I mean, the Eisenhower matrix, everybody know, most people know it, but there's such a vast, it's so important to know the difference between urgency and importance. And at the beginning you run after everything, you do everything and you try to do everything, and you can't do everything, and you need to prioritize. So those are like I think the 3 tops that I took with me from the crisis. And the more, when you get overwhelmed, you need. So I read a book from Ian Morris. He's a historic, and he always writes that humans are driven by fear, greed, and laziness. So when you're overwhelmed, you want to do less work, so you will find a way for it to become less. And that's usually that's what happened for me, that you start to research, and you're like, okay, how do I choose which tasks to do first and which not to do it? And you find things like the Eisenhower matrix, which improved things for me massively. Just knowing, okay, this is not important. I'm I'm just not even going to reply because I don't have the time. Things like that.
Okay. And so you in this presentation that you showed, which I'm going to link to, I think it's a really good one, where you kind of dissect crisis management in quite a lot of detail there. Did you learn all of this kind of in hindsight afterwards? Did you kind of read up about the theoretical foundations of crisis management, how you do this? Was it afterwards, or was it like during that you were trying to get these a handle on these crisis management frameworks?
I think it's difficult to say 50-50, maybe 60 afterwards, 40 during the crisis, something around that. So quite a few things I learned about during the crisis and applied them in the crisis already. Some things I applied subconsciously, not knowing what I was doing, and then when you read up on it, you're like, oh, this is why this worked better than other things, you know. So it's about half, I would say, half during and half in hindsight, reading up on it. So the theoretical stuff that I show in presentations, most of that I found out afterwards. You know, the practical part comes from the crisis experience. Maybe that's a better way of instead of 50-50, the practical part is mostly from the crisis and the theoretical part is mostly after reading up on it.
Okay. So what do you do now?
That's I hate this question because I don't. I'm like in a transition phase right now where I spent the last few years trying to reinvest cash that was lying around after the forest. Like my father split up the cash that was left over, so I ended up with the historical buildings and some cash. So I was busy sorting myself out with doing investments. One thing we do quite a bit is we in the last few years we financed real estate projects. You know, mezzanine financing, if you know what that is. Yep. And I've invested in a few startups, and that's what I did the last few years. Now I'm selling the palace. I will have the situation again that I will have to look after some cash, but that's something I will take my time with and think about in the next few months what I want to do. I mean, I know my stuff about forestry, so there's the small part of me thinking maybe I'll get back into that. And otherwise, I started writing a blog during COVID, and I want to write more on my blog. And because it's just now with the palace sale, the last few months was so intense. You underestimate the amount of work it takes to prepare a palace for handover. For example, we had 340 cubic meters of trash that we threw away. That takes a lot of work to drag out of rooms and put in containers and have it driven off. So yeah, I would like to share more my experiences on crisis management, succession planning, all the things that I learned in the last few years, and bring some value to other families with similar issues, and hope to save them a few headaches that we were having. So that's what I'm doing, looking after our assets and writing my blog currently, and speaking at conferences on this.
Yeah, that's what I thought, and this is also how we started talking. By the way, let's quickly reminisce. The reason why we got connected was, I believe you were quite prolifically commenting on this group around Anrik. Is that right? On LinkedIn.
Yeah, I think so the common connection is goes a bit further. I need to think. The name doesn't come to mind. I'm in a group called the Family Business Academy, together with
was it Ryan Kovac, maybe?
I'm not the name will come to mind, but the guy whose name right now I'm missing, and if you're listening, I'm really sorry, but he again is connected with I think also with you and with 1 second. Today it's Sunday with even with Evan Thompson as well.
Oh, okay.
So I think I saw Evan's content first, and then you comment a lot on his content. So that's the chain.
Got it. I thought interesting. I thought it was via Anrik. Okay, and so
no, Anrik, I think I've seen some of his content from you commenting on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't look. It's sometimes it's difficult to follow the chain, see where how it developed.
So
but
I was thinking that maybe this was the connection, because I saw your profile, and I thought this guy knows clearly so much, because at that time I didn't know the details, of course, but crisis management and helping, say, family businesses, that sounds immediately like, okay, this guy is like an ideal consultant, right? Or this could be at least part of what you do, is that you could advise people who are going through some kind of existential crisis in their business. So is this something that you're considering doing, or not really?
I get this question quite a bit, and I'm like in a place where I'm not sure. Maybe not. It's if someone comes up to me and asks me, look, I have a crisis, could you help us? I would probably say yes, but it's not something where I'm right now actively going out saying I'm looking for clients or something. It's I'm still not sure if being a consultant is what I would like to do and be good at. It's right now I'm just pondering upon it. What I do enjoy is I like to write. I like to create content, and I like speaking. So when I'm on stage, I love doing that. And I don't know. It's difficult to say. As I said, if someone comes up to me and asks me, I would definitely say yes and help them, and then from there I would be having a look and seeing how it goes. I did a work like during COVID. I did a workshop on crisis management, so I tested it a little bit. If in a workshop setting, I can help families going through crisis, and I had 4 people who signed up who were going through a crisis, and I think that from the feedback I got, the content did help them. So that kind of like helps you quite a bit. Knowing maybe back to the Dunning-Kruger effect, I think right now I'm a bit in the after when you go through a lot, you're in the imposter syndrome. So sometimes I'm like, why would anybody? How could I help anybody? And then you need to think back. It's like actually I know a lot, so I have been through it. So somebody who has no clue like I did back then. So just having someone who has been through it is of vast value. But it's you always have to take yourself by the nose and say no. You know your stuff.
Absolutely. And I think if you now go on the speaking circuit, you produce content, you also become very better at communicating your ideas, and therefore people will naturally then come to you and tell you about their crisis. And if at some point some kind of commercial opportunity opens that you can help someone with crisis management, that's just simply going to come by virtue of you being out there. So I think you're doing it exactly right. It's not like you need to get clients in any way, but you, by simply sharing your message. And again, I really would encourage everyone to listen to that one presentation that you gave. We're definitely going to link to it in the footer, because the way how you dissected crisis management was so insightful there, like how you even distinguished between what were these different stages between problem and crisis and disaster. And so it's like each of these has a specific definition and different rules for how to manage that. So I think it's just very insightful. It almost felt like an academic treatise on the topic of crisis management. And while I'm not
a little bit, yes,
and while I'm not an expert on it myself, it seemed like this is what real expertise looks like. You were through the fire yourself, and you now have the theoretical and kind of almost academic framework to how to deal with it. Now that makes for an amazing sort of knowledge value proposition. So you're definitely on the right track here.
Thank you. The issue with crisis usually is that the people going through a crisis first have to realize that they are in a crisis. So that's the big issue that we also had, and that I see time and time again when people that I know are experiencing something. So that's the first issue: realizing that you are in a crisis, and then realizing that you need help. And then usually the most difficult part is when you are in a crisis, you're usually short on cash. So you're very wary of getting on any consultants or any people that work. So we would have probably should have gotten a crisis expert or somebody to come on and help us through it. And we had some suggestions from people that might have been able to help us or whatever, but you just look at it, it's like, I can't afford anybody. So, you need to do it yourself. And that's also one of the big issues with, in crisis. People who go through crisis, usually they lack resources, and that's the reason why they're in crisis.
Yeah, because as Eric Schmidt, old former CEO of Google, said, revenue solves all known problems. So if the revenue were fine, then you probably wouldn't be in a crisis. But it's interesting. You mentioned that you didn't know that you were in a crisis back then, or was your father not fully aware of the magnitude of the problem?
Yeah. So.
Oh, wow.
So it in this case it was this CEO that came on board was the first CEO who was not from the founder's circle. He wasn't the founder, or he wasn't a friend of a founder. So it was like the first CEO that was properly employed. So even though what that should actually mean that this guy is more neutral and looks at things properly, it kind of gave some people the feeling that, who's this random dude coming in and now saying everything is crap, not trust this. Yeah. So that was one thing. And also it's when you're really in your heart, in your mind, you do something for the good of the family, and you're really sure it's a great idea, and you have a certain idea and purpose behind it, and then it doesn't work. It's the opposite. It creates the opposite of what you wanted it to do. You're in denial for a while, at least. And denial is very dangerous, because if you deny that you are in a crisis, or that something isn't the way it is, then all the decisions you make are automatically wrong, because you think you're in a different spot. And that's it took my father a while to realize, okay, this is serious. This is a big problem.
Your father
that's
must
something you see and again.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Your father must be very proud of you with how you managed all of this, right?
He keeps telling me, yes.
You don't believe it?
It's difficult, when you have some doubt in yourself that you did a good job, and someone comes and says, "Oh, I'm proud of you, you did a good job," you're like, "Nah, I didn't. You're lying, or you're just saying this to make me feel good." So that's it's more of an issue of my not me thinking that my father is just saying it to say it, but it's more of a personal issue that it takes some time to, and it's getting better by the month. The more time I look at the more time I spend reflecting it, the more I speak to others, the more that's why, speaking and presenting about the crisis helps me myself to work through it, and with reflection and improving. So these days I can take people giving me good feedback positively. Well, a few years ago I would have like seen positive feedback as something negative by thinking, people just saying this to make me feel better.
But when you evaluate yourself and your own performance in the crisis semi-objectively as much as you can, would you say that there would have been opportunities to get an even better outcome than you did? Because effectively you navigated through it successfully. That's at least what, as an external observer, I would conclude. So do you think you've done something significantly better?
I do believe that it could have been handled better in absolute terms. In relative terms, I think not really much better. So let me explain. So if you know your stuff, if you know the possibilities like litigation funds, etc., there was opportunities to do a better job, or a different job. If it would have ended up better, I don't know. Maybe you end up fighting the fraud, like fighting the banks. You go on a 20-year legal battle, and then at the end of the day, it turns out worse than what we did. That you can't say that for sure. So, but I think there's opportunities to have tried different ways with a potentially better outcome. So if that makes sense. But with the knowledge that we had as a family, with the situation we were in, with having me as a crisis manager at the age of 25, in relative terms, there wasn't very much opportunity. We could have saved money on lawyers and consultants. That's probably the biggest part that could have been a lot better. Choosing different consultants, and not everything is a lawyer problem. But if you get the wrong lawyer, it is everything can quickly become a law problem. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the same with every consultant. If you have a consultant for a certain topic, it's like a toolbox. This guy's a hammer, this guy's a screwdriver, and the hammer doesn't solve he tries to solve every problem as it is a nail, but if it's a screw, you need a screwdriver. There might be someone else. So that's also something that I learned, that you need. It's important to choose your consultants carefully for the task and the problem that you have at hand.
Absolutely. And that, I think that is such a wealth of experience that then, even if you did not turn this into a commercial proposition, as to why you don't even need to, you can be like what this other guy was, who was your mentor during this time, right? You could effectively just by virtue of publishing about this, talking about it, you will then get people who are in that kind of scenario. And maybe you could even come up with some kind of innovative business model for this. I always think in business terms. So I wonder, like, in the moment, you don't charge them. You provide them mentorship. And then you suggest from the beginning, listen, I'm going to help you for free. And if you get through this, I'm going to let you pay me whatever you think it was worth, or something like that, so that you have some kind of like a stake in it, because you then have motivation to do well by them, and not just to kind of provide advice, because that could also, just doing mentorship for free can end up being draining, especially when it's about a topic as kind of emotionally harrowing as is a crisis, because you get somebody on the line for whom their entire livelihood is at stake. But so if you were to be able to combine that with hey, I'm totally going to help you, and I know that at this time you don't have the money to pay me, that's fine, but if we get through this, you decide what it was worth, right?
Sounds like that sounds good. I mean, I'm also considering to publish a book about it. I'm currently dipping my toes in the whole writing theme by writing a blog, and I mean, after you have so many blog posts, you can bundle them and publish a book, for example, it gives you like a basis to start writing a book. So I mean, I had a pretty good writing routine till the palace sale. Actually, when you get your first offer, and then this kind of like threw threw everything on its head a little bit. But I hope now to get back into my daily writing routine.
Writing, but how about like doing a YouTube channel? I think you publishing videos about this, that's more au jour, you know.
Yeah. I have it on, you know, I even have an idea to do TikTok videos and stuff, but it's really difficult to get to concise everything down onto those. I think it's 2 minutes. I don't remember.
No, I think they increased it now. TikTok has increased it to 10 minutes, I think.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
You see, I haven't I have
Behind
TikTok
the
on my
time,
phone.
Octavian.
I'm behind the time. You know, when you focus on some other stuff.
I think so. You were shipping out cubic meters of garbage out of a palace, so that's you just are busy with other things. So one of the last topics I wanted to cover with you, I found that so interesting, was the topic of the family constitution. You have that as a family with a lot of tradition. You have a constitution, and I actually, when we got married, my wife and I, which is 2.5 years ago, we also started with having a family constitution. We did not expand on it, unfortunately. We sort of let it slide, but we have some document where we say how we run the family, what do we consider important, what are the trade-offs that we're making, and all of that. So I'm very intrigued by this idea. Could you talk about, like, what does your family constitution consist of? Is it like an official document that you guys have? Tell me.
Well, we don't have one. So that's an issue that we have as a family, which is most families have a constitution. I think we used to have one up to World War II, and it ended up in an oven somewhere, and it wasn't rebuilt after. You know, in our case, it was not a document. It was just how the typical thing, how you behave, how you treat each other, that you get taught as a kid. But normally, you should, or if you have at least once your family has considerable wealth behind it, you should have some sort of constitution written down with rules of engagement, you could call them, that depending on your country you come from, you can even make them legally binding to family members with inheritance law and family law. But that's I'm not an expert on that. And then where the tricky part comes in is you can have a constitution document, but it needs to be lived as well. And many families have a constitution document which people sign, but they don't live by it. People sign it even and don't know what's written in it really, because they don't bother. It's like, if everybody signs it, I'll sign it as well. So you can overdo it. You know, if once your constitution growing in size is also not always, you know, the best to do, because then it gets too complicated. So it's just, and a constitution can be dynamic as well. So what does happen in many families, sometime great grandfather Joe sat down and wrote the constitution, and this is what we live by. But times change. There's things written in there that might not be in any way of the time anymore. Just a silly example, which can happen in some families, that somewhere in the constitution, for example, it says that any family member marrying anybody of color is automatically thrown out of the family. That's not of the time. There might have been a good reason for it very long time ago, but nowadays it's not of the time. This has nothing. It should be cut out. You should take it out and throw it away. It has no value. So a constitution should be reworked. You know, with every inheritance, like every wealth transition to the next generation, you should also rework your constitution to be actually right for the time again, and for the people that want to live by it. You know, it's an important piece of paper, but as with everything, it can become toxic and lead to toxic behavior rather than actually doing what it should be doing.
Do you plan to revivify it?
Yes, I do plan for the future to write one. Start with that. I mean, it makes it easier once you have your own. values. The constitution really reflects the family values essentially and the family purpose. And once you have your own self grounded in a solid foundation where you know exactly what values do I want to live by, what values do I want my family to live by, you should start writing them down.
Exactly, because I think it's going to. You don't have kids, right, at this point?
No.
No, but can I ask? Do you plan to have?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, at that point, it's going to become probably the calling for you to actually tackle that project is probably going to be stronger then, right?
Probably, yes.
Excellent. No, I love the idea of a constitution because it also gets a sense of, especially when it's something that you craft really well. But look at what is done to the United States, right? It is something that can absolutely define way more than just a family. You know, a well-crafted founding document, even if you just do it sometimes, I think you will have such an important role to play in the legacy of your family, if I may say so, if you really revivify it and if future generations will look at that document and you do it so well that they will look at that document and think, wow, our ancestor did something great here, that we lost it in the big war 300 years ago, or however many years we're looking down the line. But then this guy in the 21st century actually revivified it. So I think you will have a great impact on your family if you do that well, just like the Constitution of the United States, one of the most important documents ever written in the history of humanity. So I just love the idea of having a rule book, a document that a specific group of people lives by, and that is good and inherently moral in its nature, and it's infused by wisdom.
Definitely.
And especially wisdom, as you have, and I really believe that these kind of hard times that you have gone through really shape you as a person and makes you wiser. Like, I think you, although in the moment it was difficult, and you're still now battling the health consequences of that really difficult time, it will end up being a great gift for both you and your family going forward because you went through this. So
well, thank you. I hope so. So nothing is for naught, as you would say.
Absolutely. Lovely. So, Octavian, thank you so much. It was so illuminating. What would you like to end the conversation with? Is there something you want the listeners to do, to check you out, to subscribe to your blog or anything like that?
Well, obviously, if anybody who's interested in the topic of crisis and personal development for a crisis, you can go check out my blog. Would make me very happy. Otherwise, there's one, as I said, the main message that I always like to bring to people is that money isn't everything. In our case, the crisis also led to a lot of problems in the family. People don't speak to each other anymore. Look after yourself and your family. That's much more important than the money on your bank account in the end of the day.
That's a great point to end on. Thank you so much, Octavian. Really appreciated that.
Thank you for inviting me, and have a great Sunday.
You too. Thank you, man.
Bye.